So please be aware of that. And hello to all. My name is Manuel Bautista. I am a postdoc researcher at the University of Oxford. I'm currently in London, so I apologize in advance for any environmental noise, especially obnoxious cars accelerating very rapidly. We are here today to watch the presentation of a paper by Matteo Calabrese. Matteo is a doctoral researcher at the University of Luxembourg. His research focuses on financial history, that is to say investment funds, holdings, and financial intermediaries, as well as long-run economic history, such as the history of labor, economic role determinants, and the comparative analysis within the Eurasian globe. Matteo holds a master's degree in history from the University of Leiden in the Netherlands, and a master's degree in economics from the University of Utrecht, also in the Netherlands. At the Luxembourg Center for Contemporary and Digital History, Matteo is working on the history of investment funds in Luxembourg under the supervision of Professor Benoit Majerus, with whom he co-authored the paper that he's about to present, which I understand is or has been accepted pending revisions for a journal called Contemporary European History. The name of the paper is Archaeology of a Treasure Island, Actors and Practices of Holdings in Luxembourg, 1929-1940. Just to remind Matteo of the dynamics of the presentation, he will have 30 minutes to present the paper. And then if anyone has a question, you may raise it after he presents in the question and answers round. If there are questions that come to the chat, and I can read them, but we also encourage the people attending to read them themselves. So without much further ado, thank you, Matteo. The floor is yours. And you have 30 minutes. I'll let you know when you have 5 minutes coming.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. I try to share this screen if I'm able to. So, can you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Thank you so much. So, let me see if it's going on. Okay, don't know. Okay, it's here. Okay, thank you so much for inviting me to this like a series of seminars, which I really like and I followed in the past. So, Archaeology of a Treasure Island, Actors and Practices of Holding Companies in Luxembourg. Between 1929 and 1940, I wrote this paper together with Benoit Majerus. We are both from like the C2DH department at University of Luxembourg. Let me go soon to the presentation. Wait, let me move this thing to see. So with this paper, we wanted to have like a focus on the emergence of offshore in Europe. As you can guess, there is not so much literature about this. An exception is Switzerland, that is quite well studied at the moment. Like we have works from Farquet, Paquier, Gex. There is also some history on banking secrecy in Switzerland by Zachman in his book, like The Hidden Wealth of Nations. Luxembourg is like, in many recent studies on La Place Financière of Luxembourg, it's recognized the importance of the Holding Act of 1929, this law that started the holding system in Luxembourg, but from post-war. And there is some kind of void on the studies on the origin and what happened, the implementation of holding companies in Luxembourg between the interwar years. So what's our contribution with this article? So first, the origin. So why this law appeared? Who was behind it? Second, was this law successful? Now I know that successful is really a broad term, but I'm going to explain what I mean by successful. And did Luxembourg become an offshore center already in the interwar years? These are the three main research questions of this article. Just a quick glimpse at the sources that we used. So like Luxembourg's National Archives, an archive like in Luxembourg about like the laws in Luxembourg, national business registers of companies in Luxembourg. Then we use this FinLux archive, which is like an archive that we built and that collects all the holding companies, stakeholders, administrators, notaries, aggregate capital stock between 1929 and 1940 for all the holding companies in Luxembourg, and even beyond. Like actually, this archive is quite broad. There are like banks, also investment funds until nowadays. We used also like the Ford archives from Detroit, the Belgian National Bank archives, and several newspapers from Belgium and Luxembourg of the time. Just a quick definition of holding company. Actually, I really like the definition that the same holding law in Luxembourg gives of the holding company. It's really clear to me. It's quick and clear, like to the point. So any Luxembourg, since we are talking about holding company in Luxembourg, so any Luxembourg domiciled company whose exclusive object is the acquisition of shareholdings in any form whatsoever in other Luxembourg or foreign companies, and management and the creation of value out of such shareholdings in such a way that it has no industrial activity or on its own, and does not keep a commercial establishment open to the public. What is a holding company? So, as you can imagine, there are several types of holdings. Control holdings is the most typical one. I would say like the most archetypical one. So with the mother company has several subsidiaries. So like where there is like the big one that controls these several like subsidiaries through participations. We have holding, patent holdings. The one that I here I define holding the brevet. Patent holding, you can already see in a patent holding like a type of a tax dodging scheme. No? So there is the mother company that owns the right of a patent, and the subsidiaries, they have to buy these rights when they use the patent. And this is a way like somehow to do this profit and loss consolidation. So money, profits, they go from the subsidiary towards the mother company. You know, I'm gonna tell you more about this soon. Then there is this type of company called the holding déplacement, which is essentially an ancestor of investment trusts. So like what is nowadays called like a closed-end investment fund. I'm gonna talk even more about this and like how this law, the holding company law of 1929, was useful for incorporating this type of funds in Luxembourg at the time. So about the origin, like nowadays in Luxembourg, in many quarters, they talk about a sort of amnesia of the genesis. So it's not clear. It actually somehow like in the collective imaginary, they have forgot how this law appeared, why, who was behind the law. It seems when you go back into time like that, you check like commentaries, like newspapers of the time, that it was like behind the law, there was this legal department of a Luxembourg conglomerate for the steel production called Arbed. Actually, there is even an historical work that points out at a real clear archive in Luxembourg that says that in these archives, like there are documents that prove that this conglomerate produced the law before it was presented at the chamber in Luxembourg. So yeah, there is this indication of the archive, but when I went to check the archive if it was still there, actually it had disappeared. Someone was saying that it was even burned. It's not clear what happened to this archive. No reproducibility of this piece of science here. And also there is some contradiction in what happened afterwards, because it seems that the Arbed, so like they proposed the law, but then like the head of the legal department of Arbed, so the supposedly creator of the law, became like the biggest opponent, public opponent of the law. It was denouncing like the abuses of the law through the newspapers of the time. And more than other things, this Arbed didn't incorporate any holding company in Luxembourg. Anyway, so this is the status of at the moment of the about like the origin of the law and the actors behind it. The point is, what I've seen is that there are no mentions of the law in any official source prior to the debate at the chamber. So this law suddenly pops up, no? Like I've seen that for many laws, many debates, like while going through all the debates in 1928 and 1929 at Luxembourg chamber, you can see like some kind of a recurrence, like so someone is mentioning a project of law before it's being discussed, or like there are like budget laws, budget, this type of sources where it's planned what is going to happen throughout the years. Okay, nothing is mentioned about the holding law. It just appeared, and okay, I found some documents. This is the document that I found, and this is like a letter that Arbed, so this steel conglomerate in Luxembourg, sent to the head of the fiscal agency, the agency in Luxembourg that was charged to collect taxes from companies and to interpret the existing law about that. So essentially in this letter, that is in fact really short, this company was asking the head of the department to be really careful and to follow this debate on double taxation avoidance. So in case they incorporated holding in Luxembourg, they were asking him like, please, let's try to not have like double taxation of the yearly capital tax on companies in Luxembourg. So this is just a mention, and this mention is like from, as you can see, 10 of May 1929. And the head of this department essentially says, yes, their request is justified, and is like forwarding this letter to the Minister of Finance, that at the time in Luxembourg was like Pierre Dupont. And this was on 21st of May 1929. 6 days later, Pierre Brown, who is like the head of the department, is able to already create the draft report for the law. And this report essentially is 100 pages. It really sounds a bit weird, like that he was able to write this thing like in 6 days or even 2 weeks. And I'm going to tell you more soon about that. So this is the guy. And yeah, like he was like a civil servant, a lawyer, was in the council. And even this is a bit weird. After like the promulgation of the law in 1929, this guy resigned from this like state occupations, and 3 years later he was like hired by this company, Arbed. Just here, like this is a picture of the original law. It's a bit funny somehow that besides like defining what it is a holding company in Luxembourg, the first thing that the law says is like what the holding company does not have to pay. So taxes on revenues, surtax, like so there are several, there are mentioned and listed all the taxes that the company does, the holding company in Luxembourg doesn't have to pay. The only taxes that it has to pay are capital stock taxes. Besides like some registration taxes, the main tax is just like a yearly taxes on capital that is just 0.16% of the capital. Now, just like a quick mention of what was happening at the time in Europe. So Switzerland was the main hub for the incorporation of holding companies. At the end of 1931, this was the peak year in their development. The aggregate size of holding company was like over 3.3 billion Swiss francs. And banks at the time accounted only for 1.8 billion. And you can see that Switzerland and Luxembourg have many things in common. So geographical position, so in the middle of Europe. They are both like French and German speaking countries. This is great for business networks. Like they have a neutral attitude towards like the two big powers of the time, like in Europe, so French and German, but also like they are this neutrality is good for Italian and Austrian that want to meet there, like Dutch and Belgian. So you can imagine all these conflicts within Europe at the time. Both of them, they didn't have colonies. And as Paquier, one of these authors that talks about Switzerland at the time, this was using like the holding company's business was a way somehow to enter the international investment environment for them. Okay, how to somehow threaten this position of Switzerland? Why they should, in which way they could compete? Luxembourg could compete with Switzerland. Race to the bottom. That is like the quick way, but it's not enough like to reach to get an advantage in this business. Having a stable and predictable juridical framework. This is like something that has been like commented by several observators of the time as one of the main ingredients for this recipe of the good holding companies hub all the time. Also advertising, because like Luxembourg was really good apparently at advertising this market, this product that they were selling. And I will tell you more about this like in soon. Okay, just want to show you what it is, the race to the bottom that they did here for holding companies. This is the situation. This is the original draft, the one that I was mentioning before, that apparently the head of the fiscal department in Luxembourg did in either 2 weeks or 6 days, but this is really a detailed document that prospects really a lot of work behind it. Indeed, you can see there is like the collection of all the taxes that holding companies they have to pay in Luxembourg, in Switzerland, like Canton Clary, and in Liechtenstein. As you see, like at the beginning, so prior to the law in 1929, the amount of taxes for an hypothetical holding company in Luxembourg was much higher than in Switzerland and Liechtenstein. So what to do? Essentially cut and make it lower. They are simply lowering the bar of the taxation, so to attract capitals to go to Luxembourg. So who is behind the law? This is what we are trying to understand here. So besides the lobbying pressure of this steel conglomerate, there are several actors interested in the implementation of the law. Besides like foreign like companies and people that want to invest like for merely tax avoidance reasons like in Luxembourg. So there are local financial intermediaries. Just think that notaries, lawyers, and banks that could be involved in this system, they can get fees, commissions from this type of work. Political figures, there are several politicians in Luxembourg that are involved in first person in the holding system. So they sit in the administration boards of these companies that are incorporated in Luxembourg. And for the state budget, actually in the paper, we talk about all these 3 points, but here I want just to focus on the third one, so the state budget. So this is again the draft of the report that the head of the department, Pierre Brown, sent to the Ministry of Finance and to the chamber for the debate of the law. And here at the very first page of this draft, it's mentioned what it is like the reason. I mentioned several reasons behind the implementation of law, but the first one is talking about the troubles of order, economic order, and of monetary order that have happened after the First World War. So you can immediately guess that the monetary problems are related to what happened after the abandon by all the countries involved in the First World War of the gold standard system. What happened after the war with like first a phase of depression, then like this up and down in the inflation. This is just what happened in Luxembourg, but just think what happened in Germany with the hyperinflation of these years. So this is what it refers with the troubles of or monetary order. About the economic order, of tribals of economic order, what was happening during the interwar years in Luxembourg, but in any country of Europe, was that there was an increasing phase of protectionism and higher tariffs, new trade barriers that was somehow affecting and damaging like the steel industry. And for agriculture, so these two were the two main industries in Luxembourg at the time, like so agriculture and the steel industry. There were similar problems like about like so this closing up like the borders through all and closing up the markets. And there were problems of low productivity. There is many studies about this, like so the competitors were stronger in this sector. And the financial sector was still too small in Luxembourg, was nothing compared to nowadays. At the same time, there were like both liberals and socialists that were asking for less taxes. For example, the socialists, they were asking for less taxes for the agricultural sector. Again, the state was building like the railway system, like the electricity grid. From many parties, they were asking for less custom taxes because, okay, these tariff wars and they need to export more steel. Plus, okay, 1929, when I say 1929, I say a crisis, like the Great Depression. So afterwards, they had to compensate fiscal losses due to a negative economic environment at the time. So here you can see like a clear explanation why the state was interested in the H29. This is like the an excerpt from like the budget law of 1932. And the person that is writing this is like Pierre Dupont, that was at the time still Minister of Finance in Luxembourg. So essentially here is saying that, okay, the country is hit by the economic crisis, but luckily the new legislation on holdings, it was able somehow to counterbalance a bit this fiscal hemorrhage that was too much big, essentially. So the holding companies law of 1929 was somehow bringing fiscal revenues to the state. And this is what Pierre Dupont was saying also, was already forecasting at a chamber debate for the promulgation of for the approval of the law. So essentially saying like that the société holding, so like the company, the holding companies will have a very big impact on from a financial point of view in Luxembourg, and they will bring up like they will open up Luxembourg to the international business. About the success, so like I was saying, like the success is a bit hard to define this word, no? Because success could be from many points of view. Consider that if we consider Luxembourg compared to Switzerland at the same time, okay, like it's not a success because like Switzerland is bigger, has a bigger capital size, aggregate capital size for all the holdings there. But you can see that from 1929 until 1939, the growth, this is just the number of the holding companies listed in Luxembourg, is growing like not exponentially, but is growing like constantly. 1939, you can see like that, okay, the peak is in 1938, 1939 is already decreasing, and then it falls the number because many companies and in their capitals, they flee due to the Nazi invasion in Luxembourg and the war. Here, you can see that even more clearly. This is the aggregate capital stock of all the holding companies listed in Luxembourg. So there is like a big leap at the beginning, and okay, then it's a bit stable during 1932, 1931, 1932, these years where the Great Depression is hitting really hard. Then there is this peak in 1938, and then like it's decreasing, and you cannot see here the graph, but it's falling down. This is something that we calculated through several sources that we collected that put it together. And again, like just to give to have an idea of how strong was the impact of this law for state revenues in Luxembourg. So in the very first year of the implementation of this law, so in 1929, I consider that the law was in the first companies after the promulgation of the law in July 1929 were set up in Luxembourg around September. So it's just like 4 months. In 4 months, these companies were already able to contribute to 0.4% of the state budget. And you can see that in 1930, it's already a big leap here in 1.37. Then it's a bit oscillating, and this is mainly due to the economic crisis, but still they are bringing revenues like to the state. And then like from 1935, 1936, it's growing. It's growing again 1.38, 1.44%. Now, sorry. This is about the third point of our article. So if like Luxembourg was an offshore center at the time. So also here there is a huge debate on what it is offshore, what does it mean this word, like if offshore is tax haven. Okay, what we mean here, just simply, we say that offshore essentially is what happens when a state, through a race to the bottom in some kind of coding of capital, as like Katerina Pistor would say, they obtain that capital that has been originating in some other countries go to the country where the law has been implemented and brings revenues to the state. You can see here we have some documents that we have found about this holding company called Sogeparfi. And this person is saying like the main reason for having part of my assets managed by a company incorporated in Luxembourg was the fact that this country would always protect private property, and in the past foreign deposits were never subject to any restrictions. Originally, I had the intention to form a Swiss corporation for this purpose, but I abandoned the idea in favor of a company incorporated in Luxembourg, owing to the much lower corporation taxes in Luxembourg. So you can see that actually this company was okay. You can see like the name of this person like sounds a bit like Latino. So
5 minutes.
Okay. Well, yes, but this was so I want to say this was a company from Switzerland. So like, there are several factors combined. Here we did like somehow a quick estimation of the nationalities involved in the system. You can see that France and Belgium are like the main ones. Ford, again, I'm gonna just go quickly to what Ford was, so what like the employees and the people involved in the in these companies were saying. So moving Ford Motor Company to Luxembourg was essentially an operation done solely for tax purposes. This is another example that I'm gonna go a bit quickly through this one. This is just, I wanted to show how many nationalities were involved. And yes, like this, it's an interesting case, but I will talk more about this another time. Let me go just through to the conclusions. So what we argue with this article. So the Holding Act of 1929 was most likely the outcome of a lobbying action by the Luxembourg steel conglomerate Arbet. Yet the project found immediate interest of several political factions and of local financial intermediaries in Luxembourg, besides foreign people and companies interested in avoiding, but we could say evading taxes from their countries of residence. The law produces income for the state and also for private taxers like local and foreigners, and initiated the reputation of Luxembourg as an international financial center, so in the already interwar years. And we argue finally that therefore Luxembourg became an offshore financial center in terms of taxation of holding companies and investment trusts, trusts already from the interwar years, thanks to the success of age 29. And this is it.
Thank you, Matteo.
Thank you.
Particularly as you still have 3 more minutes, I'll be saving them for you to give final comments that you have at the end of the session. So we have 2 brief questions from Miguel. I don't know if Miguel wants to make them himself, or please also raise your hand or add the questions to the queue if you'd like. Miguel?
Okay, I was writing, but I prefer to talk straight to Matteo. Well, I have 2 brief questions for you. For me, it's a surprise to find such a quantity of French capital in Luxembourg. Probably it's a stereotype, but for me, Luxembourg is the central point of the German capital. I mean, not to mention. The rich people, the great companies, German companies sending their money. I would like you to reflect much more about the origin of this capital when this French capital moved through the German one later. Secondly, I'm interested in the survivors. You are counting about 1,500 holding capitals companies. How many of these companies still survive in the present times? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I can answer right now.
Manuel?
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
Sure,
go ahead.
you can answer. Sure,
Yes.
you can answer.
Yeah. So about like the nationality of holding companies in Luxembourg during this period, actually, it's a bit hard to really get what was like the main origin of these capitals, because like what we had is just like so the stakeholders and the place of residence of these stakeholders. Now, I've seen many cases, for example, even Italian people having their residence in Paris. And this was also the case for German people. So like when we say like France is involved, we mean that in terms of residence of the stakeholders. So I would say that yes, like one of the reasons like France is so present, okay, is like the proximity, geographical proximity. So you can see like France and Belgium. Why not Germany? Okay, Germany, I have 2 answers that are, but I cannot say that like as definitive, because we don't have enough data to say like to have a conclusive answer to this. So one thing is that, okay, Germany was facing probably in the first phases, probably there was like maybe there were less capitals. This is just a supposition that has to be corroborated by further evidence. Less capitals than France. Another one is like Jewish capitals, no? And I can suspect that many Jewish people had their residence like in the origin of their capitals, even though like could have been originated from Germany. Maybe it was like moved first to another country. So like these people had like their residence, for example, in France, or typically in Switzerland, or even just in Luxembourg. No? For example, there is this family of the Levy brothers. This is like clearly a Jewish name that somehow was like had some origin in Hamburg in Germany, but it seems that they were using these companies through Luxembourg. So in that case, like just by using like the data, we will say, this is a Luxembourgish company, but actually it's not clear, because it's just like about the residence of these people. And for example, there is also like a famous case is like the Warburg Bank. This Warburg Bank was resident in Hamburg, and they was investing in investment trusts of this archetypical type in Luxembourg at the time, and they were resident in Germany at the time, but with the war they flee to the UK, no? And so at this point, like I think it's a bit hard to understand what type of what was their nationality, what type of how to define these capitals, even if they were like German, Luxembourgish, Swiss. Okay, about the number of holding companies. So the number dropped like from 1,500 around 500 at the beginning of the war to 470 around like at the end of the war. And there was a phase after the war from 1945 where like several commentators were talking about oblivion of the holding system. But this system was going to have an upsurge like really soon in two directions. Again, holding companies that started to grow again like 2000 to the order of thousands like soon, but then like also this changed because like the existing regulations and laws about holding companies, like they changed it, so they changed the name, so like it's a bit hard to follow afterwards like what happened. But the other branch was like that of investment funds, because the innovation that they did in the years after the war was like that they used, when I say they, I mean like fiscal authorities and financial intermediaries in Luxembourg, they used like the same legislation for holding companies also for investment trusts, as for investment funds.
Matteo, I have two questions, and I think that Manuel must have had technical problems, so we expect him to be back soon. My first question is about advertising, because you said that they one of the strategies to attract these new companies, these new holding companies, was to do advertising. But at the same time, this was a very complex moment geopolitically, right? With a lot of competition for revenue, the Great Depression. So what were these strategies? What did they say to attract these companies? And was there like some sort of domestic resistance to this kind of policy, right? And the other question is about how the government calculated what they could gain and what they could lose from these tax cuts, right? Because at the same time, it was a little bit risky, it seems to me, during this kind of fragile political economy moment internationally, to just cut taxes without the assurance that they would actually get enough revenue to compensate for that, especially if they didn't have any major industries that they could rely on to compensate. So were there any like techniques to calculate, to forecast, to perhaps give not only the policymakers but their constituency some sort of security regarding, no, this is not going to be a major blow to state revenues?
Okay, thanks for the question. About advertising, I cut that part in the presentation, but you can find that in the article. Actually, they were actively selling this product as a product. Like, for example, there is this fair, it's a market fair in Chicago in 1933. And the Luxembourg government sent one person, like the director of one small agency in Luxembourg, like a government agency, to go there and to advertise the holdings in the US. So like there are like the documents and the pamphlets of this person that went there like with several papers, and he was distributing these papers to businessmen like that were at this fair in Chicago. And but yeah, like you can see in the paper this picture, like and then yeah, it's also really well done. Like this picture, you can see like it's a bit surprising because this is the 30s, no? But they did this with a very high detail, graphical detail. And there are like these squares, like the business is growing, like, and saying like you should invest here because this is really the lowest taxation rate in Europe. So this is was a way. And about like the domestic resistance, yeah, at the beginning there was a kind of strong domestic resistance. Like this was firstly evident at the chamber. So at the chamber, like there was this majority of liberal parties, like Parti de la Droite, like the right party, and Catholics. They were pushing for the holdings, but socialists and they were against, but they were the minority at the chamber. And actually the socialists were like really somehow like anticipating like things that would have been said later. For example, one of them was saying like, we don't want letterboxes, just letterboxes like companies in Luxembourg, just a letterbox. So this was one of the first time that this letterbox like formula was used. And actually the same person was saying like, we don't want a new feudalism through holding companies, like a capitalistic feudalism in Luxembourg. So this was at the beginning. Then like throughout the years, these critical voices were waning, were kind of decreasing like in their intensity. And this mainly because, to go to your third point, because the system was working for the state. Essentially, okay, maybe there have been like there was this lobbying pressure at the beginning. There were politicians involved like directly in the business, but already at the beginning, when they prospected the law, they were able to say that this law will not affect the domestic market of Luxembourg. So this is just a plain way to attract foreign capital for free, essentially. So they, first of all, there were no law before about holding companies in Luxembourg. And the point is like that the law was really clear that this holding company could not have any commercial or industrial activity in Luxembourg, resident in Luxembourg. So this type of activities were those that were bringing money to the state from Luxembourg, so the domestic market. But so if you don't have any industrial or commercial activity in Luxembourg, so this is really win-win situation for Luxembourg. They are just lowering like these taxes for foreign capitals. So yeah, no domestic market is my answer to the third question.
Thank you, thank you. I was looking at the paper, but I didn't see the pictures you
yes,
mentioned.
Let me
so
see
but if you have after the talk, you can send, because I think it's really interesting to see how well they were like communicating with graphic design techniques at the time for propaganda, for international propaganda. So I'm very interested in that. Would love to see more.
I'm gonna show you after the questions, like I'm gonna find it.
Yes, also feel free to share it whenever you find it at whatever time. And like show your screen. And I'm sorry my connection on the iPad fell, but I did want to ask you a question that I think I've become more interested in, which is to say, what is the influence of Luxembourg financiers and I wouldn't say politicians, but maybe treasury and banking officers for the regime that comes after World War II? I'm curious to hear if there are any continuities and interests that they are defending, even though it falls outside of the realm of your paper. I think I would be curious to see if you found anything in your research that might give us some insight as to how they see the coming of international financial regulation after World War II.
Thank you for this question. Like, let me see. Okay, there is like first of all, also during the war, no, there is like this Nazi power. Actually, we were wondering what Nazi did, like how did they react to the holding company law, and actually it seems like from the documents that we have that are limited, because like it's just until 1941, then we don't have documents accessible for that period, and the Nazi power. It seems that the Nazis were trying to keep this system, so they were also interested. They got immediately that okay, this is a source of money, and so they wanted to keep they kept like the legal framework essentially unaltered. So it was still there, but the companies, they were fleeing essentially because like okay, again, like this should be this is a part of a PhD study that they are doing now in Luxembourg. They are trying to understand how many Jewish entrepreneurs were involved in this holding system. Many of them, whatever was the situation, they immediately left Luxembourg. But also imagine Ford, no? Like, so Ford, the motor company, was having like its company there, and they moved immediately. So despite Nazis were interested in having that system still working, many companies and many people, typically because they were war enemies or like people persecuted from Nazis, or simply investors, they were not trusting this environment, and it was like a bit like a unpredictable environment that of a Nazi occupation. They just left Luxembourg. It's interesting that so I was saying that the head of that fiscal administration that was charged of checking like the holding companies in Luxembourg, so he left that job and went to work for the lobbying company. Then the person that became the new head of the administration, actually he went through all the periods. So he went through the war, so he was working under the Nazi people, but he went also after, so he was still working like as the head of this administration after 1945. So this is a sign of the continuity of this administration. So like that person was working there, and the politicians that were involved in the holding system, in particular this Pierre Dupont, no? This Pierre Dupont was like the minister for finances at the time of the promulgation of the law. But then, okay, he became like the prime minister, like prior to the war. Then he was like the prime minister of Luxembourg government during the exile. And then in the years after the war, he was again the prime minister. And I checked like several documents and several like interpretations, like several answers that he gave to people that were asking him about like interpretation of these laws. It was always to keep this system and to have like the most like liberal and laissez-faire interpretation of these rules.
You're muted, Manuel.
Sorry. Yes, thank you, Matteo. And then the other question I have is because you were referring to laws and regulations in Switzerland, and how much are legislators and regulators in Luxembourg imitating or copying or influencing other legislators and regulators in say Switzerland and other European countries at the time?
Thank you for this question, because this is exactly what I'm gonna work soon on, like for let's say a spin-off of this paper. So like the first thing is that it seems this we just have like some verbal and rumors about this. Like it seems that the government Luxembourg government was used to send like observators to Switzerland. This is like happened like throughout the whole period, like from like 1929 still the 80s. I say this because like I had a talk with the former prime minister in Luxembourg like during the 80s, and he was saying like that it was a kind of tradition in Luxembourg to send like jurists, like experts of law that were working for the government physically to Switzerland to study their system. And many of them consider that also like in Luxembourg for a long period there wasn't a real university, you know, okay, there were a completely structured university. Many people, okay, there was like a department of law, but many people, they did their doctoral studies, or even like, let's say what is now like master studies, like either in France, in Switzerland, sometimes in Germany, you know? So there were people that were going actually there to study. On the other hand, what about the imitation afterward? No? So like one thing that many people have asked me before, like it's like, so if you lower the bar of taxation for holding companies, no? So at the beginning, the lowest one was like Switzerland and Liechtenstein. Okay, now like Luxembourg lowered a bit more. And what if someone else wants to lower again? Like, so if this is working, why someone else doesn't do that? And indeed, someone else did that. And this someone else was Monaco. Monaco in 1935, it seemed like the positive experience of what happened in Luxembourg, further lowered the bar of taxation for holding companies. And so at this point, like there is a new competitor, apparently, but the system, it seemed that it didn't work in Monaco. And actually, I read this commentary by the same guy that probably invented like the holding law in Luxembourg. So like the head of the department, of the legal department of that company, the steel conglomerate that probably made the law. So this person was analyzing the Monaco case, and he says like, okay, this law in Luxembourg is not working, even though like the taxation is inferior. Why? And it's essentially because like what I was saying, like so the ingredients for the perfect offshore center recipe, no? So you need like a race to the bottom, but you need also like the stability and predictability of the legal system. So you have to know that like is stable. The law will be always there, no? Stable and predictable. So for example, in Luxembourg, this was clear because at a certain point, like socialists and liberal parties were all converging towards keeping this legislation. Now, someone else like asked me about what, like Monaco was not stable and predictable as an environment, a social and political environment. Yes, it was, but here I'm just talking about the legal framework, so not the overall environment. So legal framework, and the problem that was individuated by the head of the legal department of Arbed in Luxembourg for Monaco was that for law specialists, the law in Monaco was somehow irrational. He says this, like it was irrational because somehow they had a lower taxation burden for ordinary companies rather than holding companies. So there was a clash, was not working, and this was creating somehow a clash between these two aspects of the overall legislation for business companies in Monaco that was deemed not as stable and predictable by investors. This is the interpretation of the guy in Luxembourg, no? And indeed, my idea is to delve more into the study of the Monaco system, and I was trying indeed to look for sources and yeah, like somehow like the business register there. For sure, it didn't work because like Luxembourg was better in terms of number and the aggregate capital stock. But I want to really see what that guy meant by saying this.
Thank you, Matteo. This has been a really interesting paper. I want to thank you all for attending and to Matteo for presenting his work at the Financial History Network. Our next session will take place in May, and we invite you all to follow us on Twitter and our mailing list, FinHisNet. Many thanks to all for attending. Thank you.